Welcome to this week's Wellness Wednesday. And for this week's episode, I'm talking with Kirsty Cullen, who is Director of Nutrition at the Optimum Health Clinic. And this video is the sort of next video, and I guess a series of videos of how to support yourself through the current coronavirus challenges. And this is the video that we've had a number of requests for about how to support your immune system given some of the challenges that obviously we're all facing at this point in time. So in this video, we'll talk about some general principles, particularly foods to emphasize. Kirsty will talk about some of the research behind some of the supplements that we work with. But as a caveat, and we'll talk about this in the video, we're not recommending just going out and buying and self-medicating supplements. That's not something that we recommend people do. But if you're already working with a practitioner, I think it'll be a helpful way to understand why you're taking certain things. And if you want to work with one of the practitioner team, obviously at this point, for any new patients coming in, we've got a particular focus around, in the wider picture, making sure that we're supporting immunity. But we do not look at ME chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia from just one perspective, and often supporting the overall system will have its own impact on that. So here is Kirsty. So welcome, Kirsty. Thank you so much for joining me for this session. I know a lot of people are feeling quite concerned and they're keen to have some suggestions and some sort of general principles. Do you want to just start off by saying a little bit about kind of what we can do, what we can't do with nutrition, both in terms of food and supplements, and sort of how that can impact and the role that can play with affecting immune function?
Yes, certainly. Good morning. They are uncertain times. No one questions that. And, it's a really quickly evolving situation where medics are working really hard to develop sort of strategies for future protection. So it's really important to say and to preface all of our discussions today with the fact that we don't have the answers at OHC specific to COVID-19. Nobody does. It's really important to state that there are no official current nutritional guidelines that are considered specifically preventative nutrition measures where COVID-19 is concerned. We do have the benefit within our field of nutritional therapy of being able to listen to some fantastic educators in our field. And those educators are reviewing research and selecting information that may be useful to clients in and around the whole concept of supporting our immune function and our position of general health. So that's really the position that we come from. Nutritional therapy and its role is really to support the body to be optimized and to nurture it to kind of be at its strongest. So we can use advice around diet and lifestyle, and in a one-to-one setting around supplements also, to really look to support the body and the general function of the immune system, which is the very best that we can do at the moment.
There are a number of nutrients that we already know can have an impact in terms of supporting immune function. And as you say, that there is already an enormous body of research that exists around that. And we're sort of right at the beginning of looking at how does that actually impact upon the current sort of situation. Do you want to say a little bit just about how the immune system functions? Because I think that's probably also a relevant part of this picture at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are many nutrients in research that are suggested to have involvement in immune functioning. So things like vitamin A, D, C, B6, B12, some of the trace minerals, magnesium, zinc, selenium. So we can certainly think in a practical way about how we involve foods that are rich in those nutrients in our diet. That's something very simplistically that we can do. When you're looking at a lot of the research and information around the immune system at the moment, you're going to see different terms. So just to give a really simplistic idea of the immune system and how it functions, we can think of it in two divisions. So there's the innate immune system, which kind of moves really quickly to destroy immediate immune challenges from a general sense. And generally it does that via kind of an inflammatory immune response, which is aimed at dealing with the situation, and then in theory it resolves the inflammation and goes about sort of, repairing damage. That innate immune system is non-specific, so it doesn't change with repeated exposure to the same pathogen. This is where the second division, the adaptive immune response, kind of kicks in. That is the immune division that is responsible for immune memory. So that's the principle on which vaccines are kind of based, so that subsequent and repeated attack from a specific pathogen will be met with an adaptive immune response. So that's the development of specific immunity. So you'll see those terms mentioned in and around the research we're going to discuss today. And I think that kind of helps to break things down a little bit.
Thank you. And I think it's also worth just touching on at this point that people can get very into the idea of, I've got to take supplements, I've got to eat the right foods. And they can sort of forget the importance of the fundamentals. And, it's sort of become a cultural meme already, the sort of idea of kind of washing hands. And I found myself thinking that the song Happy Birthday is never going to be the same for this generation of children. But do you want us to touch on, I know people have already heard it in many other places, but from our perspective, why that stuff is so important?
Hugely important. And again, anything we discuss today does not denote from the fact that the frontline advice is from the government, is from the NHS, and they're putting out really useful advice and support around good hygiene, hand washing regularly, care over where you're coughing, i.e. sort of not into the hands, ideally into the crook of the elbow, avoiding touching your face and mouth and nose. And you can also now add sort of social distancing and self-isolation into this whole category too. Those are extremely important measures that the government are recommending and that we can all follow.
And I put out a video on Monday this week around managing anxiety and avoiding, a few pieces of that video. One of the things was just kind of managing one's own state, but also managing one's own access to sort of news and that sort of 24-hour kind of endless news cycle. Do you want to just say, obviously people can watch that video for the kind of full story there, but do you want to just say a few thoughts, perhaps just to kind of reinforce that from your side?
Sure. There is a real balance, I think, to be had between keeping informed and increasing levels of anxiety and stress. So immersing yourself in daily reports may not be helpful if you're finding that that is increasing your levels of anxiety and stress. So that's a real caveat to be aware of. There is some research that suggests that anxiety has the potential capacity to dysregulate immune function. So that's quite interesting in and of itself. There's a paper in 2015 by Moret et al., which sort of says that stress can impact on inflammation in the body, and inflammation can of course then impact on our immune function and our ability to sort of defend ourselves against disease. So if you sense that news reports on a loop are making you anxious, where you can, I would recommend asking a family member to keep up to date and just feedback on a need-to-know basis the things that you do need to know, and keeping calm and, kind of decreasing our anxiety. There are real practical ways that we can go about that, and tools that we use so commonly, within the clinic in terms of sort of meditation and mindfulness and breathing exercises are all really, really well employed at this point in time if anxiety is kind of your default.
That's great. And I think also just, it's avoiding, my wife and I were having a conversation actually over dinner last night, that one of the things we noticed was happening is as soon as one of us read something else, we were immediately WhatsApping, or if, we're in the house together, telling the other one. And it's sort of like we would notice that we would just be kind of calming and settling, and then immediately you'd be sort of kind of in it again. And it's also, I think it's worth having. So what we agreed was, let's not constantly send back and forth. Let's a few times a day sort of check in and kind of help each other with the sort of digesting and metabolizing and processing and decision making side of it. But it's just news is very addictive, and the sort of one of the things that we try to do is we try to think our way to a feeling of safety, and it's something that I've talked about a lot in other videos. But when we feel anxious, we think, if I can just get that I can think about it enough and talk about it enough, then I'll feel safe. And it's almost always the opposite. The more we think about it and we talk about it, the more we tend to wind ourselves up. And that's not saying not talking about how we feel isn't important. It is, but talking about all the details and this and have you read that and did you know that, it tends to just cause more stress and anxiety. And actually, the more we come into our body, the more we use things like meditation, the more that we feel our feelings and actually talk about how we feel, it's a much more helpful way of processing and digesting. So Kirsty, one of the other things that can be important in terms of supporting immunity is sleep. Do you want to just touch on that a bit?
Yeah, so looking at the research, there's quite an interesting link between sleep and general immune function. So there's a paper in 2011 that I had a look at by Bezadovsky et al. That kind of postulates that sleep has a strong regulative influence on immune function, and that actually prolonged sleep curtailment or sleep deprivation imposes potentially adverse effects on host immune defenses. So that's quite an interesting link. And in a very non-alarmist way, there are practical things that we can put in place quite easily around that. So really safeguarding your sleep hygiene approaches. So thinking about, good sleep routine, making sure you're getting into bed pre-midnight as much as possible, and as many pre-midnight sleep hours as possible are really beneficial. Avoiding screens and bright lights and Wi-Fi in the hour kind of running up to bedtime. Thinking about tools that might be useful for you. So listening to audiobooks, meditation, mindfulness, relaxing bath, anything really to prepare the body for sleep and to really maximize on those sleep hours to support general health and general immune system function.
That's great. And I think people often underestimate the value of the fundamentals. I think people can sometimes overestimate the importance of highly complex specific things and underestimate. Stop watching too much news. Do what you can to meditate, to calm your system, get enough sleep. All the things that people are hopefully already doing as part of their healing path just become even more important.
Yeah, absolutely. And at this time, watching the 10 o'clock news just before you try to rest is probably not the best advice, particularly as if we go back to, news producing anxiety, then it's something certainly to be avoided before you try to sleep.
Yeah. So let's start to come into some of the specific nutrients. When you mentioned some of those a little bit earlier. So let's just sort of come through those sort of one by one. Again, you might want to repeat your caveats around this, but yeah.
Yeah, always the caveats are there. So we are thinking from a dietary perspective. Supplements have their place, but actually you shouldn't be working with supplements without the guidance of a practitioner, because supplements are going to vary in terms of need from person to person based on their diet, their age, their needs, their medications. So I'm absolutely not recommending hearing what I'm saying and thinking I'm going to run out and buy a supplement that meets with what Kirsty said about that particular nutrient. Let's focus on the diet. Let's focus on getting good foods into the diet that are rich in nutrients that we are seeing in research support the general functioning of the immune system. The first one, top of the list, no surprise to anybody, would be vitamin D. Vitamin D is, long associated with immune health, and vitamin D deficiency is sadly not uncommon in the UK due to our wonderful weather. It's a marker that we routinely test at the clinic because it does have its importance not only in immune health but in kind of chronic fatigue as well. And it is a central immune nutrient, evidenced by the fact that most immune cells have a vitamin D receptor. So that kind of gives us an indication of why and how it's important. There's a paper in 2009 by Gombart that illustrates that the discovery that vitamin D induces antimicrobial gene expression. And so the paper kind of goes on to suggest that deficiency in vitamin D may lead to suboptimal responses towards bacterial and viral infections. Again, that's really interesting to note, given that we're looking to support our general immune function. Let's think about D, and where we get it from, the sun, which obviously is not out today. And, as we get into April, that becomes more relevant because the April sun sort of forwards to October is kind of that sweet spot really of sun exposure.
And that might be as simple as if, people are in, self-quarantine or shutdown, whatever phase people might be watching this at. If you've got a garden or a balcony, it might even just be as simple as sitting with the sun on your face, obviously being sensible in terms of kind of too much sun or whatever, but just getting some sun. I believe even if the eyes are closed, we're still absorbing some vitamin D, right? So
absolutely right. So, that is our frontline recommendation for sure. There are foods that are rich in vitamin D. So oily fish, red meat in moderation, eggs, they're standard foods that we can quite easily introduce and include on the weekly shopping list,
right.
and support our vitamin D levels as much as we can.
And then one of the ones that is people are seeing, I think, quite a lot on social media at the moment is vitamin C. And I think there's probably some fake news stories about people saying you just have to take loads of vitamin C and it cures coronavirus, which is, I'm pretty sure, inaccurate. But do you want to say a bit about the evidence that is there?
Yeah, exactly the message we don't want to give. There is great research around vitamin C. It's long associated with supporting immune function again. It's an antioxidant, it's an anti-inflammatory. There's a really interesting paper by Carr and McGeaney in 2017, which says, I quote, vitamin C contributes to immune defense by supporting various cellular functions of both innate and adaptive immune systems. Vitamin C supports epithelial barrier function against pathogens. Why is that interesting? Because epithelial barriers are those barriers in the lungs that, give us important protection, in particular in providing resilience to pneumonia. So that's really interesting to know. And we can take that again in quite a general sense. You can also listen to people like Andrew Saul, who is editor of the Orthomolecular Medicine News Service, Dr. Ben Lynch, who's a nutrigenomics expert, and they're really driving the message about the potential antiviral properties of vitamin C within an evidence base, that's been published across many years. Practitioner guidance always on vitamin C dosing, because it's certainly true, tolerance is going to vary from person to person. But let's get back to the diet. Let's focus again on vitamin C rich foods, and those go way beyond oranges, FYI. So red and green peppers, kiwis, mango, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, lemon, strawberries, tomato juice, spinach, broccoli, all really replete in vitamin C. So again, when we're looking at the shopping list, and I appreciate, that there are limitations on certain foods in supermarkets at the minute, so we do the best we can. We select a couple of those foods and we add them in where there's availability, but really just being mindful of these foods when we're making that shopping list is important potentially.
Great. And then you mentioned some of the trace minerals. So let's come into some of those.
Yeah, so zinc is another nutrient that is associated with supporting immune functioning. According to Nutrilink, who have provided some great resources and research around this topic, zinc may exert an antiviral effect suggested in research. So that may be why we're sort of considering it within this context, but it has a huge number of functions within the body. It's a really, really important trace mineral. Thinking foods again, turkey, lean beef, cooked spinach, broccoli, green beans and lentils. And again, if we're thinking back to the practicalities of food storage, lentils, a good store cupboard essential. Cooked spinach or spinach can be added into the freezer and, we can have it sort of available there. So again, it's thinking practically, it's thinking realistically about what's available and just choosing a couple of options from those lists to support ourselves.
Great. And then next on, I'm sort of cheating. You make me sound cleverer than I am, but next on your list is selenium. So let's touch on that.
Yeah. So again, selenium is thought, if you look at the research, to support antiviral immune activity. Research suggests that selenium influences our inflammatory and immune responses generally. So say Hoffman and Barry in 2008, and it's involved in both innate and adaptive immune responses, as we sort of discussed earlier. There's a paper way back in the 90s by Beck that kind of suggests that selenium, I quote, acts not only to elevate antiviral immunity, but to prevent genetic adaptations in viral RNA. So again, that is to be taken in a general sense. That's not specific to COVID-19, but it's really interesting information that we can think about when we are looking at the diet. Which foods are rich in selenium? Tuna, sardines, chicken, brown rice. Spinach appears again, so Popeye definitely had it right, and Brazil nuts. So again, store cupboard essentials, we can design around that particular list.
Great. And next on this, we have vitamin A.
Yeah. And I only want to think about vitamin A from a food perspective. That's important to reiterate again at this point. But deficiency in vitamin A is thought to be associated with impaired renewal of mucosal barriers. Think of mucosal barriers as the barrier between the outside world and the inside us. So a really important frontline defense. So again, thinking tuna, thinking eggs, thinking fish liver, really important elements for us to think about.
Great. And then just coming on to a few other bits, omega-3, so getting fats, say a bit about that.
Yeah, so the immune system, as we said right at the beginning, creates an inflammatory response to infection. Omega-3 fats are shown in research to possess an anti-inflammatory capacity. So they can be quite important after that initial innate immune response to really kind of resolve the inflammatory response and support healing. And so we're thinking about oily fish, we're thinking about flax seeds, walnuts, chia seeds, hemp seeds, edamame beans. And so again, things like edamame beans available in frozen form can be popped into the freezer for sure. And then there's lots of seeds there that we can kind of, add into smoothies and add into porridges and things that are just practically useful for us, alongside obviously sort of recommendations for oily fish as they stand at sort of around 2 portions a week.
My wife will be very pleased at the edamame beans. So then you've got the gut and probiotics on the list. And I just want to say at this point, I'm mindful that for some people there's a lot of pieces to this, but I think also just reflect as we're going through these, it sort of, I hopefully reminds people the importance of the fundamentals, because these are all things that in a good, healthy diet are going to be optimized a certain amount anyway. But yeah, let's just touch on the gut and probiotics and the role that can play in helping support.
So the gut we could talk about for hours in and of itself.
And we have, and we will continue to do so in other videos.
Always do. It's my pet area, as any one of my clients will tell you. The gut houses around 70 to 80% of our immune cells. That's immense. And so that kind of indicates the importance of gut health, not only from a structural perspective, but also from a microbial balance perspective. Various interesting research papers. If you're a nerd, you can get lost for hours in this stuff. But there's a paper by Zakuma in 2017, which says, I quote, beneficial effects of probiotics in modulating viral immunity were observed in randomized clinical trials. Probiotics may induce specific changes in innate immunity that may be involved with enhancing IgA responses. So frontline innate immune responses, really, really interesting stuff. There's another randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trial, so our gold standard.
That'll be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely, by Bergeron et al. In 2010, that looked at the use of Lactobacillus plantarum and paracasei, the impact of probiotics on symptoms associated with the common cold. And it showed a reduction in pharyngeal symptoms, so throat-based symptoms. Again, that's really interesting to us at the moment. There's also an interesting review article from Siva Mathuri et al. In 2019, which looks at probiotic use in athletes. Why is that interesting to us? Because athletes are susceptible to upper respiratory tract infections. So that's going to be interesting. And that particular study showed that probiotic supplementation improved the intestinal permeability, immune system function, intestinal microbiota, inflammatory system and reduce the severity and incidence of respiratory tract infections. So again, what can we take from this? There are foods that are rich in pro and prebiotics. So thinking fermented foods, things like kefir, miso, kimchi. Also just thinking the very basics of plant food. So plant foods are really rich in both probiotics and prebiotics. So that old adage of making sure that we've got 50% of the plate plant-based, rich in different colors is going to be good, solid advice at this point.
To remind people again, I know I'm probably overstating the point here. We're not saying go out and buy all of these supplements. What we are saying is emphasize the food. And as I already just said, I think it's a great sign of why a healthy, balanced diet is important. Kirsty, just a couple more things I think it would be good to touch on. Hydration. Why is it important people make sure they drink enough water at this point?
Yeah, particularly where people may have fevers and they're sweating, really important to rehydrate. The ideal is to consume around 2 litres a day, but some of that will come from your food. So let's think more in the region of 1 to 1.5 litres a day, which is about 2 to 3 pints of fluid a day, sipped gradually throughout the day. And just being mindful if that you have a fever and you are sweating, you will be losing more fluid. So just keeping that hydration on point is key.
And then I just think as a final point, we should just touch on what you put in your notes as anti-nutrients. So things that actually are going to impair immune function. So just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
This is where we take away all the things that people are probably looking forward to about being stuck at home.
I know. This is where I'm known as the fun Grinch. I'm going to start with alcohol actually at this point. Alcohol may negatively impact on the uptake and metabolism and excretion of many of the nutrients that we've spoken about. So vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin A, just to kind of name a few. There's a research paper by Sarkar et al. In 2015, which suggests alcohol disrupts immune pathways in complex and seemingly paradoxical ways. These disruptions can impair the body's ability to defend against infection. So common sense prevails, doesn't it? Heavy drinking of alcohol at this moment in time when we're trying to support immune system function is not going to be the recommendation. What's also really interesting is that glucose and vitamin C use the same transporters for entry into the cells. So to simplify that, they work competitively to kind of get into the cell. There was a great paper in 2005 by Chen et al., which says that hyperglycemia, so high levels of glucose, will exclude vitamin C from the cell and resulted in decreased antioxidant capacity. Antioxidant capacity is an important element of our immune function. And obviously, we can assume logically from that, if you've got a diet high in refined sugars and refined carbohydrates, which increases your circulating levels of glucose, that may well compete with vitamin C for cellular entry. Therefore, a diet high in those refined sugars is, again, not going to be recommended at this point in time when we're trying to sort of increase our vitamin C stores.
Kirsty, that has been a bit of an amazing whistle-stop tour of a number of different pieces here. And we obviously, some of these things we've already covered in more detail in previous videos. Other pieces we know we plan to cover in future videos. The recommendation is always work with a practitioner whenever it comes to supplementation. Having a good, healthy, balanced diet goes a long way towards supporting the system as well. Obviously, people want to find out more about working with the Optimum Health Clinic. They can request a free information pack at theoptimumhealthclinic.com. You can also request a free 15-minute chat with one of the practitioner team. And we're still functioning absolutely normally because, as it happens, many of our team work remotely anyway. So we're well positioned to be supporting people. Kirsty, thank you so much for your, I know you've spent a lot of time the last couple of days researching, putting this together. Thank you everyone for watching today. I hope that's been helpful and supportive. Tomorrow we have the second in the In Therapy series, my brand new series following real life patient journeys. First episode came out yesterday. Do check that out if you haven't already. So I look forward to talking with you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.